I think in 2019 we're going to see three main areas develop. The first of those would be in the context of fines under the GDPR. I mean, we've been talking about fines for the last 18 months being a prevalent part of what this GDPR means, and that has brought it to boardroom level. The next year will involve much more in terms of fines, but smart management of dealings with the regulators will be an important facet of that. Because of the consistency mechanism, what we see in other parts of Europe, we should see follow in Ireland and other jurisdictions. Another area that is developing in the next, has been developing and will continue to develop over the next year is convergence. So we see everything from reg tech, insure tech, fintech, sports tech, ag tech, and ad tech, all examples of convergence of traditional sectors with technology-related related matters. In that particular space, we've seen a lot more development around ad tech, particularly in light of GDPR. So in the context of ad tech, we are likely to see a lot more challenges over the next 12 months to the norms that have built up around the ad tech business. I think a second area that I'd focus on is DSARs, data subject access requests. We've seen a 56% increase in data subject access requests already since the GDPR was implemented. I think that's going to further increase as people become more aware of their rights under the GDPR over the course of the next year. People are using data subject access rights in a variety of different ways and for a variety of different purposes. Primarily, people are using it as a way to understand how an organization is processing their information. But secondly, and we see it often allied with a potential claim that's coming against a particular organization. So it's almost like a precursor to an employment-related matter, for example. The question for organizations now going forward is, well, should I have that information? In other words, do I need to retain as much information as I already have been? Because it's going to cost me a lot of time, effort, and money to collate the information to comply with the data subject access request. So there are certainly some questions in some organizations as to whether or not they should be retaining the information in that context. On the flip side, if you don't have the information, it may not be possible for you to fully defend an action that's being taken against you. So it's two sides of the coin, and companies are going to evaluate that much more so. I think a third area that I'd focus on is the e-privacy regulation. The e-privacy regulation is a very important piece of law that will have a big impact on companies engaging with their customers as a result. I think over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, we're likely to see that develop into a much more coherent piece of legislation. It's still going through the processes of development and change, and it's still not certain as to exactly what that will be. But companies are going to have to adapt now and over the next 12 months to get ready for that legislation coming into force. They're going to have to think very carefully about the types of consent that they're obtaining from individuals, and they're going to have to think very carefully about the types of marketing that they're going to be able to conduct going forward. Europe certainly seems to be, perhaps for commercial reasons or maybe other reasons, but certainly seems to be driving the agenda on privacy across the world. Most recently, we've seen California adopt a new piece of legislation that is much more aligned to European privacy norms than has been taken in the US to date. One interesting dimension, though, that could be adopted more from a European perspective in some areas is a more focused approach on a sectoral basis. So in the USA, HIPAA, for example, is a privacy piece of legislation that addresses health-related matters. COPPA dealing with children. And they are specific rules that apply in those particular sectors. But I would say, in the main, I think Europe has taken the appropriate approach and certainly is a leading approach across the rest of the world. Technology is a very fast-moving environment. There's a lot of changes happening all the time. We've heard a lot about artificial intelligence. We've heard a lot about blockchain, and they are continuing to evolve. They're definitely driving the future of many changes in the technology space. They are things that are going to have to be watched out. And I think from a legal perspective, to go back to the question, the law is always playing catch-up on these particular areas. The technology will be miles ahead of where the law is. So it's incumbent upon technology lawyers to try and develop thinking and legal practices based on, in some cases, quite antiquated legislation to apply to these new technologies. Cybersecurity is everywhere. We saw recently the Mari attack of 500 million users' data, but it's not just the large companies. Every single organization every day receives thousands of potential cyber threats that they need to address and have appropriate mechanisms in place. But it's not just the cybersecurity piece that's important in that context. It's data protection. And then from a company's perspective, the other thing that's very important in that is reputation management. Those who are subject of a cyber threat will then need to manage out the fallout from that particular scenario. So reputation is something that's very, very high on the agenda for the next 12 months as well. Today, all companies are regarded as big data companies. We conducted a survey of 200 C-suite executives, culminating in our Europe for Big Data report. And in that report, a significant proportion, up on 90% of companies, indicated that they were big data companies. And that was irrespective of the sector from which that executive's company came, whether it was consumer, technology, financial services, or otherwise. So the importance of data to organizations cannot be understated. Brexit is going to have a significant impact on all companies, not least technology companies. Technology companies are going to face significant challenges with regard to the transfers of personal data as between Ireland and the UK. The access to talent may be reduced, perhaps, depending on how we get on with a deal, no deal scenario. And one area that the UK have been pushing and will continue to push is the area of adequacy. Adequacy is a very important part of a Brexit deal for the UK. Adequacy in it would mean that the UK data protection laws would be deemed to be of an equal standard to that in the EU, and that in itself would allow for the free flow of information between the European Union and the UK in much the same way as Canada and Argentina and most recently Japan have all been deemed adequate. So therefore there's an ability to have free flow of information between the European Union and those countries. The second threat I think that's coming is in the context of litigation such as the Schrems II action, which has the, I suppose, the possibility of challenging the model contracts or standard contractual clauses, which are often used to facilitate the free flow of information between Europe and the US. So a necessity in the context of doing business in Ireland for a lot of the technology companies and the international companies that we have here is the ability to facilitate free flow of information. And I think the challenges that we see with Brexit and litigation is likely to cause difficulties for a lot of companies in continuing to operate on a globalized basis.